Welcome all to our today's sessions on HDIS, that is Health Delivery Information System. So, in last session, we discussed about health delivery information systems as to what they are. We also talked about how fragmented Indian market is right now and all the broken processes. Towards the end of the session, we discussed about designing a scalable, configurable, interoperable HDIS. So, if there is any questions, please feel free to write in the chat box, and we'll take it from there. So, today's session is a continuous of the previous session, and today we are going to discuss about the implementation methodology for HDIS. Dr. Atul is having some bandwidth issues, so he may be on and off on the video. So just bear with us. But however, we will go ahead with our session. Over to you, Dr. Atul.
Yeah, thank you, Komal. Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. So today, we'll discuss about what are different implementation methodologies of implementing healthcare delivery information system, and also the just overview of what change management is all about. Can you move to the next slide, please? Apurva? Yeah. Yeah. So all these are the steps into successful implementation of a health delivery information system, right from your client requirement till the go live and support. I'll take every step one by one. So first is basically to understand what are the client's requirement. In this, right from understanding the goals and business vision of the hospital organization, their clinical requirements, their technical requirements, uh, even administrative requirements also are taken into consideration. uh, if client is facing or the end users are facing any issues or problems by using their existing system, also are taken into consideration. uh, and implementation team will also go through the existing software in detail to understand what processes, what features and functionalities are required to be configured in the new system. So in case the client, it's a greenfield project, I mean, where client is not using any software, in that case, their existing forms, whatever forms they are filling, maybe nursing station, nursing forms, whatever forms they are having, it will be studied by the implementation team, and based on that, the requirements are, gathered. And basically, the life cycle is basically you gather all the information or all the requirements from the client, you record all those requirements, analyze those requirements, get it validated from the client, about whether these are correctly noted and recorded, and then you also have you can keep the traceability of the requirements. So this is all about you know requirement gathering. Now in this case, or frankly, for each and every stage which is listed in this slide, uh, the client or the vendor will take sign off on a written document that all the requirements are recorded correctly, and they're correctly actually identified by the implementation team. So it is the formal process is called a sign up process. Now, moving to the second stage, basically is the solution mapping. Okay, at the end of this slide, I will also give insights or my experience in implementing LIMS software in one of the largest chain of laboratories in India. Okay? So moving to the second stage, that is solution mapping. So based on the analysis of the requirements which are gathered during the requirement gathering phase, the analyst team of the vendor would then formulate the use cases, prepare the flow diagrams, flow charts, and not necessarily the new system should completely superimpose the existing processes. But with the new system, because it's an opportunity for the hospital to bring in good processes or the improve on the existing workflows. So this is an opportunity for the client as well. Now, based on the study, the implementation team would map each and every process or function or requirement with their system, which is to be implemented. And this process is called as solution mapping. Now, coming to the third stage of the implementation is basically, configuration. So based on the requirements which are gathered during this process, uh, you know, uh, the configuration, I'll just give an example or maybe a difference between what is configuration and customization. So customization is where the requirements are done with the change in the code or the software program, and configuration is where without changing the program or creating any changes in the code base, the feature is made or made available for the client. That is called as configuration. Okay, so in this case, basically based on the processes and workflows, the system is configured by the vendor implementation team, uh, and the vendor would also analyze if there is a customization requirement. Then he will also estimate the efforts, resource planning, and cost also internally. Now, coming to the next step, which is master data. So, what is master data? Master data is nothing but a fixed data, which is also important while working through the software. And the master data is first collected from each department in Excel sheet format. If they are using any existing system, it will be extracted from the existing system in Excel sheet format in specific templates provided by the vendor. The cleanup of master data is done, if there are spelling mistakes, and then after cleaning up the master data, it is again getting verified by the client team. Each of the department will verify their own master data, and they will give the sign off. Now, coming to the next stage, basically, which is also the black box testing, basically. Now, black box testing is nothing but a testing methodology in which the code or the internal structure, design, or implementation of the feature being tested is not known to the testing team. Versus white box testing is where normally the developers, they know the code base, they know the design and implementation of internal structure, and then the testing is done. Now, what happens is basically during this phase, the test cases are written by the testing team based on the requirements, and they test each test case using the new software. And if the output is basically is expected output, then the feature is passed, or otherwise it is failed. So this stage is also very important before actually the training starts happening for the end users. Now, next stage is basically key user training and UAT. UAT is nothing but user acceptance test. When the software testing by the vendor testing team is done and the issues are resolved, only then the vendor will actually expose the system or this system to the entire team or the software or the users. The client will identify then the key users on champion users, which are very experienced in those processes. So for example, somebody is working for 7 8 years in a registration or billing, they'll be chosen as a champion users because they know all the processes in that particular department. The champion users basically will be then uh, trained on the software for their respective modules, and basically they play very big important role in the hospital implementation, because these are the champion users will keep holding the hand of other users during go live and as well as post go live uh, uh, stage. The key user training will also followed by the end user training, and during this entire staff of the hospital is trained for the use of the software. So next step is go live plan, where the date of the go live is decided based on how much is the customization requirement, how much is what are the requirements which are still needs to be developed by the vendor, and what are the timelines, what is the priority of that particular software requirement. So all these are taken into consideration. The resource planning is done. because you need lots of resources on the ground in a hospital, maybe floor wise, to support during the go live. Now, go live basically also, there are multiple approaches how the hospital can decide on. Now, first method is basically big bang approach, where all the modules of the software are made available for all the departments on the date of go live. But of course, it has got its own, limitations. Now, second method, I'll talk it a little bit more about that in my, experience, what we did in the implementation. Now, second method is basically to implement the software in a phase-wise manner. Or say, for example, you start with the registration, appointment scheduling, and billing in the beginning. Then you move to the OPD modules. Then after stabilizing all these modules, you can move to the IPD, and then administrative modules such as supply chain management, etc. So this is called as phase-wise approach, or module-wise approach. This also has got, in a big chain of hospitals normally, or big hospital setup normally, phase wise manner is decided. There is another thing called as parallel run. Now run is basically nothing but on the date of go live, you start using the new system. At the same time, you are also making entries into your old system, and uh, take into consideration the outputs which is happening correctly or not, whether discount is properly done, whether the reports are getting correctly out of the new system. So everything is getting validated during parallel run. Of course, parallel run has got its own limitations, where because users they are using the old system for long, and so they are used to it. There is a lot of extra work to be done, because you have to do the same entry into the old software as well as the new software. So these are the issues in having the parallel run. uh, of course, I mean, it's a decision mutually taken by the vendor and the hospital, which is the method of choice to be taken into consideration for the implementation. Now, going to the go live date, basically, now once you are live with the new software, whether it is phase manner, whether it's a big bang, or so once you are go live, you're live on the new software, then starts your post go live support, where lots of big role is being played by champion users who are already trained on the software. So they will keep supporting their team members during this phase. Of course, vendor will also be part of your uh, post go live support, where he has his own resources at in the hospital, right? So this is all about the implementation, different stages. Now I'll just give an example of one of the LMS implementation we did in one of the biggest labs in India. So they have around 120 labs across India, and we started with their largest lab in Mumbai. Now, the date of uh, go live was, I joined that vendor side basically just before this project. I was a project manager for this particular project. So I was sent to the on the ground basically in Mumbai, and the go live date was decided, what was say 8th of April. When we started actually giving workshop or taking workshop for all champion users, then we realized that lots of requirements are still not being captured uh, in the software. Now, when this project was uh, the client selected this particular vendor, they had given SRS document, which is nothing but software requirement specification document, very well written document having 200 plus requirements, and client and the vendor has already done all the requirements in the software, and that's why the go live date was decided. Now, when we actually started giving demonstration of this software to the end users, or during the training to the champion users, we realize that uh, 40% of the requirements of the client were not met by the software. And why this happened? This happened because the SRS document, which was prepared by sitting in a room instead of going to the end user to understand their processes. Now, this was very important. So that's why the first important stage in any implementation is basically to gather the requirement. Now, we what we did, because we did have the written document, which is SRS document, very well written. We just took it blindly that these are the requirements. We did never go to the end users to understand their processes, to see how they are operating in their department. And if that would have been done, basically we would have been in a better shape while implementing it. Of course, we did a lot of requirements later on. The date of go live date was moved 3 months ahead. We did everything, of course, I mean, to meet all the requirements, and finally we did implement that. Here it is a biggest lab where around 25,000 samples they were processing every day. Huge lab. Now what we did basically, when we started getting requirements, we thought that Big Bang is not a right choice for this kind of setup. So we decided first the registration department, the accession department in the hospital, the accession department basically which collects the samples either from the walk-in patients or from their clients or from their collection centers or other network hospitals or labs. So accession department. Then third was basically the genetics department, because the genetics report turnaround time was 10 to 12 days. So we had enough time in hand. Even if there is an issue, we could fix it, within that time span. So we took a phased manner approach, implementing the LM software in that biggest lab. Slowly we started adding more and more departments, and one fine day we started in the last department, which was biochemistry department, or the chemical chemistry department basically, which used to process around 80% of the 25,000 samples per day. It was a huge department. That's why we kept it last. Now when we started, because there were what, 38 analyzers, and all analyzers were interfaced with the software. Now we started that department, and suddenly the system, it becomes standstill. The entire lab and all the processes become standstill. We didn't realize, and what is the cause of having that kind of, the software was absolutely not working. It took us 2 days to realize that the server was in data center, which is Tata data center in Mumbai, and we thought everything is right there. And then after 2 days, we asked them for the network diagram. We studied the network diagram, and what we realized basically, there were two racks on in the data center where two servers were located, and there was a pipe connecting both these servers, and that pipe was getting choked. Now, as a solution, basically, we moved both the servers on the same rack, and that problem was resolved. Now, what point I'm trying to make in this case is basically not only the functional requirement, not only the requirements which are given by the client are important, but also the infrastructure, or studying the infrastructure is also a very big uh, key step in the any implementation basically. So you should understand what kind of servers they are having, what how many servers, what is, if there is a load balancer already in place or not. So study the network diagram, study even if you have a P2P kind of network, or the still you should study every single item in infrastructure and network side as well. uh, we'll move to the next slide. Yeah. So we spoke about different stages like requirement gathering, where you understand the business goals, and depending on all the functionalities you gather, uh, the requirements. Now this is again the requirement cycle. Next slide, please. Yeah. So this is the life cycle of the requirements gathering. So we have seen this to gather, record, analyze all the requirements, validate, get it verified, and also keep it for tracing. and then confirm the requirements. Next slide, please. Now, this is basically okay. This is just an example, and of course, we did it for one of our clients. Now, all these functionalities or features or modules, you basically, uh, you know, segregate those based on the timelines required. Now, sometimes you have the vendor will not have certain models, right? And you need it. So in that case, basically, the vendor will definitely give you the timelines. Okay, it will take 3 months, it will take 6 months, or more than that. So depending on the the efforts or the the duration required by the vendor, you should basically the solution will be divided in which in different colors, say different modules. So for example, all red in color models can be deployed in 3 to 6 months. Yellow highlighted modules will be 6 to 12 months, and blue will be 1 to 2 years. Now, depending on the time being taken by the vendor, and also the priority given by the hospital, all these timelines can be decided and which will be mutually agreed by both the parties. Can you move to the next slide, please? Now, coming to the priority setting, right, for each and every functionality. So, what is important basically, all those functional requirements which are mandatory. Without that, that particular department will not be able to function, are always priority one requirements. So high return on investment and low complexity will always fall on the left side of the axis, which are actually the priority one. And those who are either moderately, with a moderate ROI, or maybe high complexity, will always fall on the right hand side of the axis. So which are taken as a phase two or phase three requirement. So this prioritization is also very important in any implementation uh, uh, of hospital information system. Next slide, please. Now, solution mapping. We saw that in the first slide itself. However, I would like to basically highlight on one of points like define as is and to be processes. This is very important stage in solution mapping. Now, software which you have selected, you define what is there and what is the, or basically what is the existing process versus what is going to be changed in the new process. All this can be documented, and it has to be very well communicated with that particular department that there will be change in the process, because that again is a part of your change management process, which is very important. Next slide, please. Now, standardized master data, basically. Now, data that remains constant or does not often change, basically is called as master data. We saw that, right? So, for example, list of doctors working in client hospital, or your price list. Price list will change only once in a year or so, right? So it will not change often. So all this kind of data, say for example, locations, the usernames, maybe nursing staff, your paramedical staff, all their names would be your master data. All your rate cards or the price list basically is your master data. So all these master data basically cleaning and getting verified is also very important. Next slide, please. So configuration, we saw that what is the difference between configuration and customization. So basically, if the requirement is meeting without changing the code, is called as configuration, and all the workflows are configured by the client team, or by the vendor team, basically, or the implementation team. All the specific rules are set. Specific price master is also set. If there is any custom requirement, that requirement where there is a change in the code base will be taken by the vendor, analyzed. They will give the effort estimation and duration for that, and depending the priority which we saw earlier, it will be delivered by the vendor to the client. Now, next slide, please. We also saw that functional or black box testing, and what is that, and what is difference between white box testing and black uh, box testing, basically. Now, in this case, all the stories, basically, or the use cases are documented properly with the scenarios. Say, for example, there is, say, discount, right? Discount is one of the features and functionalities in the hospital billing, right? So, uh, suppose, say, for example, all 60 plus patients should get 20% discount. That is the policy of the hospital, say, for example. Now you have to see, you have to document this, story as a storyboard, basically, and then use case is defined based on that. And based on that, basically, software testing team will be testing whether the 20% discount is being added to all 60 plus, patients without actually giving it. So it's automated process, right? So process is basically, okay. Whenever patient is asking for discount and you are giving it to the patient, that is a different functionality. What I'm talking it about is basically all 60 plus patients would automatically get 20% of discount on all the services. If this is the requirement by the client, it should be met by the software. Next slide, please. Now, key user training and user acceptance, right? We saw that. Now, the difference between key user and the user is basically, key users are the experienced user in those processes, and the end users are basically those in that particular department, right? So we saw that whether uh, the particular department, all the features and functionalities are tested by the client, or being used, the software being used by the end users, and if the that expected outcome is there uh, from the software, then that feature and functionality is getting passed. Otherwise, it is failed. And based on that, if it is failed, then client vendor would resolve the issue and then again present it to the end user. They will test it again. So this particular stage is basically key user training and user acceptance test. Next slide. Next slide. Yeah, sure. So this is go live planning, where end user training plan, or pilot testing, also load balancing, whether the software is taking correct the entire data, because it's all depend on the number of users logged in the system and how much data is being captured at same time, right? So load balancing is also checked uh, before actually going live. Then we saw what is parallel run and risk mitigation plan, of course, and support in case of if there is a failure of one feature or functionality, what can be done, how it can be mitigated. All that planning is done in the go live planning. Now we saw Big Bang versus model wise and post go live support plan. Next slide, please. Yeah. So during go live, I mean, there are a few important things, basically, which are very important, such as on-site targeted support from the vendor side. So if it is a multi-story building of the hospital, basically each floor will have one or two resources from the vendors to support in go live phase and supporting the end users as well. Of course, champion users, again, I'm mentioning because they play a very important role in implementation of any big implementation. Next slide. Yeah. No, I would like to, ask Dr. Pankaj if he has anything so far to add on implementation.
Yeah, okay. The only thing that I would want to talk a little bit about is the masters that Government of India now has come out with. So, in most of the implementation that have happened in the past, that sort of issue never came up. But with National Digital Health Blueprint being notified, all the masters that are included in that. So ICD-10 for diagnosis, SNOMED for all the procedures and clinical notes, and then LOINC for the labs, and then drug index and so on and so forth. So whole list of masters have been notified by the Government of India, and now any implementation that has to be done should follow that. So that is one very important change that has come in the last couple of years. I think NDHB was November 2019, and it sort of pointed to the EHR standard and the metadata standards for health that were done in 2014, 13, 14. And now everybody has to follow that. So that's one important thing. The second thing is about the change management. So starting from the go live onwards, and even before that. So this is a cause methodology that we have used extensively, and we can talk through it about how the change has to happen. So first one being consciousness of the need to change. So first of all, the organization needs to be conscious that there is a need to change. Otherwise, everybody will say, why is this being put on us? Why any new change is being sort of superimposed on us? It wasn't really required. So they need to understand that there is a need to change. Second one is aspiration to support the change. Now, they may understand that the change is required, but they may not have the aspiration. Aspiration always has to come from inside. Aspiration cannot be outside. It's always inside. So people have to aspire that I will support the change. When the change is happening, when the entire software is coming in, your physical processes are being changed, whatever work you were doing yesterday, you're doing it differently, or you'll have to do it differently. Some of it will be inconvenient initially, so you will have to support it. To support it, the aspiration has to be there, that I will support the change which is sort of coming in. And then that can happen only when there is a communication from the top. If the top management is communicating properly, and I always say that there is nothing like over communicating, because communication is the key for making the consciousness and the aspiration happen. The top management has to communicate, communicate, communicate. So there is nothing over communication. You have to whatever communication you do is going to be under communication, because you can tell the person 10 times, but until it becomes a habit, or the aspiration really comes from inside, you have to keep communicating. It is said that water always flows from the top. So if the water has to flow from the top, then the communication has to be from the top. If you say that we've kept an IT guy and he will do the change, no, that doesn't work. It has to be the CEO or the board level representative who has to take the responsibility of the communication, who has to take the responsibility of the change and be involved. If the top management is not involved, it is guaranteed that the implementation will be a failure. So we've seen it umpteen number of times. In fact, in many of the implementations that I have been, I have blankly gone to the top management and said, if you're not going to be involved, if you're not going to be responsible, if you're going to leave it that some IT guy is going to be responsible for the change, this is going to be guaranteed failure. And I can give it to you in writing, and I'm not going to be here, I'm leaving. So I've been that blunt to the top management. Either you get involved or the project is over. I'm leaving the room right now. So that's a guaranteed, based on my experience, that unless the communication really happens from the top. Understanding how to change. Now, it's not just the aspiration that is important, also the understanding is important. People have to understand how the change has to be brought in. So there's a lot of training that is required. As Dr. Atul was just talking about the training aspects, that a lot of training is required based on the requirement that the have been gathered, and the change that has been done in the configuration and the customization. So usually it is configuration. Customization should be limited to only if absolutely required. so that you're compliant to the masters and everything. um, so you have to have the understanding about how to change. So all the training is required, and training is one time training is never sufficient. You have to train until you actually are able to do it very well. Next is the strength to overcome the hurdles and implement the change. So what that means is that no implementation, large size implementation, I'm assuming, will ever go smooth. So however hard you may try, however hard you may try to get all the functionality written down, all the configuration detail written down, all the masters written down, and put into the system, however hard you may try, still things will go wrong. For sure, it will go wrong. And when it goes wrong, then it is up to the top management again to come and help in removing the hurdles so that the implementation goes on. So in one of the implementation that I was doing at one point in time, the head of the radiology got very upset, and he said, I am not able to see the X-rays and the CT scans and all the scans that have been done for the last 2 months. Now, this was a change that we were making actually. What we were doing was we were storing the old ones in a separate disk. And we were saying that, if you have to retrieve the old ones, then, you have to put in a request. So the turnaround time is going to be more. But if you have to retrieve the scans that are less than 1 month old, you can retrieve it from the server almost immediately. And then anything that is older than a year will go into archival, and you will need about a 1 day's turnaround time to retrieve it. So we had put in this policy, and this policy was done with consultation from everybody, and everybody had agreed in the room that yes, this is how we all agree, and this is perfectly fine. And because nobody can have a server that will retain or be able to give you real-time images forever, because images are of large size. And if there are very old images, more than a month or a couple of months, no doctor really goes to those images and looks at it again and again. Only in rare cases you need it as a baseline, and then those can be retrieved. You really don't have to be sort of saying, I want it now. So those are policy that were implemented. But then when we made the change, when we actually went live, the head of radiology was up in arms, and he said, this is not going to work, and you have to roll back. So rolling back is not going to be easy. So once we all have agreed, and this is a massive change that we have already done in terms of configuration of the system. Now imagine the policy has been implemented in the data center. It has been done in the PAX server. It has been done in the various modalities which are in the radiology. And now somebody says, no, this is not acceptable. Well, you accepted it earlier, and it was a deliberation. Everybody had agreed. So then the top management had to step in and tell the head of radiology to learn to work in the new environment. And this gentleman was not willing to work in the new environment, and he put in his resignation. So now it's a tough call that to let the implementation go on, or you lose your head of radiology. So these are kind of challenges that emerge. So however hard you may try, there will be hurdles that will emerge, and you will have to overcome those hurdles. It takes a lot of courage, and that is why I say the top management has to be involved. If they are not involved, this won't happen. The implementation will go wrong. There will be hurdles that will come. You will have to overcome. You will have to be hands on, and if you don't do it, this is the stage where it fails. Most of the implementations fail. I have been part of lots of implementations, change managements, and this is the stage where I've seen things failing. And I've learned it only the hard way, by stumbling and falling again and again, and then getting up and learning to walk. So purely out of experience, I'm saying that this methodology works. You have to be sort of out there looking out for the failure, and unless you're able to handle the failure, it is guaranteed to sort of the failure is guaranteed to take over. And you have continued to do this, continue to sort of do the communication and be hands on, constantly trying to remove the hurdles for the implementation, because it's not one hurdle. The hurdle will keep coming until it's a stable state. And what is a stable state? Stable state is when it becomes an ecosystem. An ecosystem is when all the different pieces, so people, processes, all the different technologies that you have put in place, when all of them stabilize, all of them learn to work with each other. I'll give you an example. In your house, you have the LED bulb. LED bulb is pretty high-end technology, but do you see it as technology? You don't. You see it as light. You see it as part of your everyday life. You switch it on, and you are able to use it, and then things like that. So same way with all your electronic gadgets at your home. You don't see them as technology. You see them as part of your life, part of your processes, daily processes, whatever those processes are, right? Now, that is an ecosystem. You have to reach a stable state where the technology gets absorbed into the process, and the people don't see it as technology, they see it as integral to the process, integral to their work, whatever they're doing. So that is the adoption. So once the adoption has happened, then there is no coming back. So then even if you try to sort of roll back, the people will not let you roll back. The people who are on the ground. I've been an auditor for one of the hospitals. I can't name it, but it's one very important hospital in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. And when I was there as an auditor, I was a JCI. It was an internal audit for JCI, and we went and looked at it. So the biggest thing that I found was adoption. The old system, the old IT system, which they were supposed to phase out, was so highly adopted by the users that the users were resisting the change. They were saying, I'm not going to get rid of my old system. I'm not going to let it go away. Now, my recommendation to the management was that you have achieved adoption to a level which is unthinkable, actually. So why let the old IT system go away? You should figure out a way of retaining it. But then there were other challenges, technical challenges. The old IT system was an old technology, so there were other considerations other than adoption for which the management had to think about. But what I'm saying is, once the adoption happens, then you can step back. But until the adoption happens, you cannot step back. Until the ecosystem gets developed, you cannot step back. If you step back before that point, it will swing back like an elastic. Like an elastic, it'll all come back, and it'll fail. And I've seen those failures many times, where because, and then I'll tell you why those failures happen. Those failures happen because most of the contracts that are written, an IT services company or an IT product company, when they write the contract, they do not write the change management into it because it suits them, right? They are product vendors. They will come and do the implementation. And once the UAT, you saw the flow that Atul shared in the beginning. So there is something called user acceptance training, so UAT. So once the users are trained, they accept the system, the IT vendor will say, all right, my job done, I'm going away. But then that's not really what is what is the best thing to do, because in healthcare, and typically in healthcare, mark my words, it is when the UAT has already happened, the users have accepted the system, the pain starts from that point onwards. So when the rubber meets the road, that is the time the pain starts. And that is the part that is not built into any healthcare contract. and that is why things fail, because people just don't realize that it is when the rubber meets the road the pain will start. So that is why whenever we teach implementation, we do special stress on the change management and the cause methodology that we just talked about, because unless you are very sure that it has become an ecosystem, you cannot let it be. If you remove your hands and step back, 100% guaranteed it will swing back like an elastic, and the change will all go. It'll just vanish. I'll stop at that and hand over back to Dr. Atul.
Thank you, Dr. Pankaj. I think you have covered even the change management as well. So, next slide, please. Yeah, we have already spoken on this. Yeah, I think that is the end of today's session, Dr. Pankaj. That was the last slide.
Thank you, Dr. Pankaj. Thank you,
Thank
Dr.
you.
Atul. So I think we can join the meet session and have an open session after, for this call
Sure.
today.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank
Thank you,
you.
everyone. We'll be there in a minute.
Thank you.